had a little problem with Tim Cook yesterday. I said to him, Tim, you're my friend. I treated you very good. You're coming in with $500 billion, but now I hear you're building all over India. I don't want you building in India. You can build in India if you want to take care of India, because India is one of the highest tariff nations in the world. It's very hard to sell into India.
Breaking news here on Apple out of the DOJ. Eamon Javers has it. Eamon?
Sarah, this is a civil antitrust lawsuit filed in the United States District Court for the District of New Jersey, and it alleges by the DOJ that Apple illegally maintains a monopoly.
Apple, the name once synonymous with innovation, prestige, and unshakable dominance in the tech world. For decades, the company wasn't just following trends, it was setting them. But today, the story is shifting. Apple's stock has shed hundreds of billions in value. Once celebrated launches are landing with less impact, and lawsuits on both sides of the Atlantic are challenging its entire business model. The question that looms is brutal. Has Apple finally run out of magic? Or is it simply coasting on nostalgia? For years, Apple reigned as the undisputed king in the US and Europe. But among the so-called Magnificent Seven tech titans, Apple has slipped dangerously close to the bottom of the pack, leaving investors uneasy and consumers underwhelmed. From garage dream to trillion-dollar empire, it's easy to forget where Apple came from. Born in a California garage, it was Steve Jobs' vision in the 1990s and early 2000s that turned it into a cultural icon. The iMac, the iPod, and most of all, the iPhone didn't just sell, they reshaped entire industries. Under Tim Cook, Apple became a financial juggernaut. With a hyper-efficient supply chain, a sprawling services division, and a market cap that once soared beyond $3 trillion, Apple seemed untouchable. At the heart of this empire was its famous walled garden, a tightly closed ecosystem where the iPhone linked perfectly with AirPods, the Apple Watch, the MacBook, and iCloud. It was seamless, polished, and addictive. Apple wasn't just selling devices, it was selling a lifestyle. And for years, millions of people happily paid the premium price to stay inside that garden. But what once felt like luxury is now being criticized as a gilded cage. Users feel trapped, with fewer choices and higher costs, and regulators have taken notice. Legal storms on the horizon. In March, the U.S. Department of Justice, backed by 15 states, filed a sweeping antitrust lawsuit accusing Apple of illegally locking in iPhone users. Across the Atlantic, the European Union's Digital Markets Act is forcing Apple to open up its App Store and allow competing app marketplaces. The once untouchable App Store, a business generating billions every year, is now under siege. Epic Games has openly attacked Apple's 30% fee as monopolistic, and if these new regulations fully take hold, Apple's golden goose could be permanently weakened. The irony is striking. The very ecosystem that made Apple untouchable may now become the chain dragging it down. Warning signs from history. Over a decade ago, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos warned that no company is immortal. The average lifespan of an S&P 500 giant? Roughly 30 years. The only way to survive? Stay customer-obsessed and keep reinventing. IBM once dominated the computer hardware industry, only to stumble into irrelevance when it failed to innovate. Many analysts now see unsettling parallels between IBM's decline and Apple's recent struggles. Cracks in the numbers. For most of the last decade, Apple's growth seemed unstoppable. But now the momentum is fading. In fiscal 2024, Apple's global revenue fell 3% from the previous year. Small but symbolic in a tech market that's otherwise expanding. And in 2025, the slowdown has continued. According to IDC, Apple sold about 44.8 million iPhones in Q2, a modest 1.5% growth. Samsung not only held the global crown but actually clawed back market share from Apple. The situation is even more dire in China, once Apple's second most important market. Sales of foreign smartphones, including iPhones, plunged over 30% year over year. Local champions like Huawei and Vivo are now dominating, powered by 5G innovation and a rising tide of buy local sentiment fueled by US-China tensions. Compare this to Apple's golden year in 2015, when the iPhone 6 drove a staggering 28% revenue surge in a single year. That kind of explosive growth feels like a distant memory. Meanwhile, rivals are thriving. Microsoft has surged on cloud and AI. Meta is booming on advertising. Google is racing ahead with Gemini. Against this backdrop, Apple looks like it's jogging while everyone else is sprinting. Innovation or stagnation? For decades, Apple was synonymous with bold innovation. Today, critics argue its big reveals feel more like incremental upgrades. The Vision Pro was pitched as the next big thing, but early adoption has been lukewarm. New iPhones arrive, with sharper cameras and minor design tweaks, but nothing revolutionary. Apple Intelligence, its much-hyped AI platform, was announced with great fanfare. But when the iPhone 16 launched, not a single Apple Intelligence feature was ready at launch. Updates are still pending, and the system won't even be available in China, a market Apple desperately needs. Meanwhile, Microsoft has partnered with OpenAI, Google has rolled out Gemini, and Meta is pouring billions into AI research. Apple, by contrast, still looks more like a device seller than a true software innovator. And in today's AI-driven world, that's a dangerous position. The China trap even Apple's legendary supply chain, once hailed as the most efficient in the world, is now a liability. Over 95% of Apple's products are still assembled in China, with more than 1,600 factories feeding its pipeline. That dependence ties Apple's fate to a single country, at a time when US-China relations are more strained than ever. Apple has begun shifting some iPhone production to India and accessories to Vietnam, but these moves are slow and costly. Analysts estimate it could take a decade or more before India's output rivals China's. Until then, Apple remains heavily exposed to geopolitical risks, rising labor costs, and cooling consumer sentiment in Asia's largest market. A tightrope. To be clear, Apple isn't collapsing. The company still reported a 5% revenue increase in Q2 of 2025, and its services division, including Apple Music, iCloud, and Apple TV Plus, remains a bright spot with high profit margins. But even here, challenges loom. Regulators are targeting in-app payments and the App Store's monopoly, threatening to chip away at the very foundation of Apple's services growth. That leaves Apple walking a tightrope. Its ecosystem, once its greatest strength, has become a target. Its iPhone sales, once a rocket engine, are sputtering. Its supply chain, once the envy of the world, is now a political liability. The final question: Apple is still one of the biggest companies on Earth, with more cash on hand than some nations. But history has shown that no empire lasts forever. If Apple cannot pivot into AI, into services, into a more open and resilient ecosystem, it risks becoming the next IBM, a legend of the past, remembered for what it once was, not for what it is becoming. The fall of Apple may not happen tomorrow, but the cracks are showing today. What do you think? Is Apple headed for decline, or does it still have another great reinvention left in its DNA?